welcome everybody to week one of STIR Crazy Month, our month here at the Vacation Rental Former Business School, where each week through the course of February, we're covering safety, sustainability, trust, insurance, and regulations. And I'm thrilled today because Justin is joining us here on this panel. Justin Ford from Breezeway. He was instrumental in getting this going with just a very simple observation from conferences through the 2023 season. And the observation is that when you attend conferences, these topics are not typically the sexy topics. They're not the topics that are going to affect your ROI in the immediacy. But all of these topics, if you're not paying attention, can significantly alter the course of your business should a liability claim or an injury or fall or something even worse occur in your properties or to your staff. And this is another part of this month is we're not just talking about our guests, we're talking about our staff, we're talking about our communities and how short-term rental businesses affect all of those. So welcome joining us today. We are recording this. Please, if you have any questions, you can click in the Q&A and drop in your questions. I'm going to start off here with a poll, just as I'm introducing everybody. So appreciate it if you could just take a second or two to take a look at that poll. Just let us know what kind of business you have. That's going to help us to tailor this a little bit better to attending live today. So let's get going. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to start off with Justin from Breezeway, just because he's on the top left of my screen. Justin, thanks so much for joining us. You are, I think, considered to be the leading expert in short-term rental safety in the industry. And welcome. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me here. And some credit to your mom, too, for picking up when I was talking about what was going on. I overheard a professional manager saying, yeah, if we don't get more bookings, I don't know how we're going to make it. And I'm sitting there going, hey, fella, there's a lot of things you got to worry about besides getting more bookings. If your property owners can't get insured, and if you have a safety incident, you're not going to make it either. And he was like, wait, what are you talking about? We're here to make money. I'm like, yeah, you got to pay attention. You got to look out every window as you drive forward because there's a lot of hazards in the road, so to speak.
Yeah, I think a lot of people fall foul of that, of head down, generating that ROI, and that's all we tend to think about. But if you're not set up with these foundations and these basics, it can really trip you up in the future. Catherine Ratcliffe, thank you so much for joining us. Catherine is really spearheading the topic of human trafficking in the short-term rental industry. And I think that is absolutely incredible because it's not a topic that is very often discussed. So I'm thrilled that you're spearheading that. I also wanted to mention that she is also coordinating and creating a brand new event in Canada called Can Stays Rental Alliance, which is a conference happening in Banff, April 20th to the 22nd. And it's really going to be pivotal for not only Canada, I feel, but the whole of North America, because it's an opportunity for short-term rental business owners to coerce and connect with politicians, legislators, and regulators of our industry, specifically in Canada, because we're having some pretty serious effects happening here, especially in British Columbia, where there's a full ban on short-term rentals in municipalities over 10,000 people. So that is a huge concern. And thank you so much for joining us and starting that conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about both issues because you're right. Human trafficking is never something that people are super excited to talk about. Justin gets a lot more attendees for his safety things because it's less painful to talk about some of those safety issues than it is this crisis with human trafficking. So thank you for acknowledging the issue and having me on.
Yeah, I think it's one of those issues we don't realize. You don't know what you don't know, and we don't realize how big this issue is. And the more it comes to light, it's one of those topics I think people are just uncomfortable to recognize is a reality. So yeah, we'll talk about that some more today. Humphrey Bowles from Superhog, thank you so much for joining us. I just love the fact you have this sun-kissed look in the Caribbean right now. But Humphrey is joining us as a supporter of the event. Superhog is actually sponsoring one of our live panels later on this month. And Humphrey has been in the insurance space and providing lots of different tools and things you can use in your business to help bridge the guest screening gap and building that trust with your audience. So Humphrey, thanks so much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, Mike. I think though I need to work on the intro that you've been given. I used to work in short-term rentals. I'd never been in insurance before.
I apologize. Yeah, I don't know why I keep connecting Superhog with insurance. So that was completely my fault. You're absolutely right.
No, lots of people do that. Lots of people do that, which is great. But maybe we should start calling it insurance because there's so much in this space which actually you are in control of. Don't you love that phrase about only doing what you can control? And I think with so much of what we're discussing today, like people are in so much control of what happens. They just need to do something about that and take control in order so that something which is so preventable doesn't turn up and blow up in their faces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're going to cover some more of that today in this session. Of course, myself, Mike Bayer, and my business partner and my mum, Heather Bayer, we're from the Vacation Rental Former Business School. We've just been around for a while sharing educational content in the short-term rental space. And we just really felt that this was a great opportunity this month to really put a spotlight on some of the content that is just not really discussed as much. And I think it's a spotlight that's well overdue, especially with the rapid growth in this industry. And yeah, actually, Heather, did you want to just say a quick hello?
Yes, of course. I'm sitting back on this session. Mike's leading it, but I just want a shout out, of course, to Justin for starting all this up. In fact, perhaps I'm going to blame you for starting this up.
Oh,
Because it started off as a post by you on LinkedIn, as Mike said, and then it was just, let's do a few podcast episodes on these topics, and then it morphed into something that's becoming much bigger, and we're hoping that this is something that perhaps we can do every year. I did speak to somebody the other day who said, hey, there's a revenue management conference, maybe we should be having a Stir Crazy conference. I'm so glad that you're all here. I just want to shout out to Superhog and Leo Walton, who I am talking to on the podcast this week in Safety Week, and we're talking about guest screening. So that is an additional part of this week, as are the blog posts and other social media posts that we are publishing all week, trying to keep this whole emphasis on safety over one full week. So this panel is pivotal to it, so I'll send you back over to Mike to kick it off.
Yeah, and lastly, before we get going, I really have to give a lot of thanks. We have Nick Massey here in the audience watching today. Nick is from Proper Insurance, and that's why I had insurance on the mind there, Humphrey. But I had to give a big thanks to Proper Insurance, who stepped up to be our primary sponsor for this entire month. They really got behind this and really believe in what we do. And I think it's a testament to them and their team recognizing the importance of these conversations. And we can't thank them enough for their support for being our top sponsors. So if you do get the chance to go and visit Proper Insurance over the next couple of weeks, we'd appreciate that. Go and find out from them and their incredible team whether or not you actually have the full coverage that you think you do. From having some conversations with them, that has been a big eye-opener for a lot of short-term rental business owners when they think they have the insurance coverage, and when they have those conversations, realize actually there's some big areas that they are being left open. I will share a link to Proper Insurance as we're going through the session, and also the opportunity where you can go to give them a call. All right, so that's it for the intro. So I've just closed the poll, and I'm going to share the results with you, just everybody can see. So we're looking at, it's a fairly even split, as we always have with Vacation Rental Former Business School, fairly even split between single property owners, multiple STR properties, and managers. And employee levels, small size 1 to 4 is dominating today. But a lot of this conversation as well is going to really help. It's going to really help those individual property owners, but also teams. The value of training your team in the things we're going to talk about today is really important. And some of the questions we're going to cover, some extra stuff, is people are just saying that they'll post the questions as they think of them. All right, so let's kick off this conversation. I would actually like to start with Catherine. And really, I think because, again, I introduced Catherine because of her incredible work with making awareness of human trafficking in short-term rentals really it needs to be a hotter topic than it is. And it's not limited. And from our conversations, what I've loved is the fact it's not limited to just looking inwardly at your properties and the guests staying at properties. It's also looking at the possibility that you're enabling labor trafficking or human trafficking inadvertently by the people you're employing and the companies that you're working with. And it is incumbent upon property management companies and individual property owners to do your due diligence. And I'd love you to just talk a little bit more about that, Catherine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mike. It's really interesting because I think as each person starts a business, regardless as to the industry, you look at the basics that you need to get. You need a tax identification number, you need a bank account, and then you start worrying about that ROI. How do you generate revenue? And some of those pieces that start to fall through the cracks that really don't get a lot of attention and awareness. And so in America, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act is actually going to be 21 years old this year. So this is not new legislation in terms of an employer's responsibility. And that's whether you have one employee or you have 1,000 employees, the responsibility is the same. And that starts with making sure that you are not complicit in human trafficking in any way. So the first way that shows up is in how you pay your team members and your vendors. And so when you think about from a cleaning perspective or pest control, lawn person, those are the first areas that you need to make sure that you're aware that you're paying the person who's actually doing the work. And so you as an employer, whether you are Venmo, Cash Apping, PayPal, or issuing through payroll funds into somebody's account, you need to make sure that they own that bank account, that it's not going into their trafficker's account. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions around this is there's a stigma that it only happens with migrant workers. And it can often be familial, where it's a parent, it's a spouse who's sending somebody off to work and collecting the funds, and you don't have access to them. And it's been interesting as we've talked about this. I've had a lot of parents saying, wait a second, can I charge my kids for insurance and for their cell phone? And of course you can, but you cannot have it payroll deducted into your account. You can do that on the back end. The employer's responsibility is to make sure that wages are deposited into that person's bank account. So that's the first way. And then really going through the training of what human trafficking is, what it looks like, and how it presents itself. Our greatest fear, I think, as property managers and hosts, is that it could show up in our rentals. But I think if we focus too much on that, it's the fact that you can be an advocate and an ally within the neighborhood, right? So when you look at who are your neighbors, your cleaners, your staff that are going to and from your property, have a lens into the neighborhood that other people may not. And so if my cleaner's there on a regular basis, they can see if there's something weird going on at the house beside or the condo beside. And so really partnering and understanding how do we demonstrate to the communities we operate in that we are taking this seriously, that we aren't turning a blind eye, that we are working through those challenges. I think same from a document control perspective in different states and different regions, there are different requirements in terms of doing verifications of identity in order to pay somebody and to have somebody within your employment. And so that's another opportunity where if I don't have access to any identification because my trafficker holds all my documents, that's a huge red flag. If I can't on the spot produce a driver's license or something like that, if I'm being driven to and from work constantly, and I don't have the latitude to stay an extra 5 minutes for a celebration or team building initiative, those are ways that we as an employer can really sort of tune into the fact that there's something that could be really off there. In addition to all of the things that we worry about from news reports about some of the sexual components that can be out there with trafficking, that it's known to exist within the community. But I think at the end of the day, one of the most important things that I hope people take away from this is really being trauma informed, because trafficking is not new. As much as I would like to believe that we're going to be able to stop this, it's something that has such a buyer demand for that it's just difficult. So you have to recognize that you might have people on your team that are trafficking victims, and you need to really be sensitive and understanding to their past experiences. And then that will maintain the support system for them and hopefully retain your team as well, just from a retention perspective.
Yeah,
Catherine, sorry,
yes, go
Mike,
on.
kind of, that's a question for Catherine about, this is such an enormous topic. I've been doing a bit of research about it, around it for a blog post recently, and hadn't realized how big it was. It's not something that's ever impacted me before, I've ever thought about. So for those who are watching this, listening to you, what is the first thing that they should be doing to make themselves more aware of what's available to them in terms of training or help or just general awareness?
So I think one, just if you can look at the definition of what human trafficking is, because I think it does get stigmatized into prostitution and migrant workers for labor. And it's so much bigger than that, as you say, Heather. I'm from Florida, so I'm a little partial to this, but I did learn about this course from Deborah Labbe when she posted it out on LinkedIn. The state of Florida has a really good course that I think is a free online 1-hour course, and it's not traumatic. The biggest fear with human trafficking is people don't want to sit through a training course where they're going to be terrified at the end of it. And I think what it really does is it gives you this baseline understanding of how it can show up in your everyday life. And this is where it's really important, I think, from a team involvement perspective, because you can have situations where it's your team member's child and you want to think through who's on emergency contact lists and all of these types of things, and looking at the technology that's developing. And then that translates into a safety component too. Snapchat is one of the biggest apps out there. And if you think about your cleaners and your staff that are in your properties, if they're sharing locations, there's some really basic things in those courses that can help you understand, like, my team could be at risk if I do this. And it just starts that pattern of, what is it? What am I looking for? Lack of eye contact, withdrawal, some of the signs that you'll see in a victim. And it'll help you be a little bit more trauma informed when you're talking, because you obviously never want to just reach out to somebody and saying, are you in trouble? Are you being trafficked? Like that can go in a very negative way, especially if they're not, because there's lots of scenarios where you just have somebody who doesn't have a car and they don't know how to drive, and their spouse is driving them to and from work, and that's not a trafficking situation. And so you don't want to jump to conclusions. You really want to let the experts handle it. I would say one of the biggest things is to store the trafficking number, so that if you do see something that is very obvious, and of course in airports and hotels and in Florida, there's a big push. You have to have it in transient locations like hotels and short-term rentals. You have to have the information posted. Having that number is very helpful, because I liken it to a wrong way driver. I'm not going to go chasing down the highway after somebody that is driving the wrong way, right? I'm going to let the experts handle this. I'm going to reach out, demonstrate what I've explained or what I've seen, and let them take it over. But I think when you look at the stats in the United States, we're the largest consumer of ourselves. 87% of trafficking victims in the United States are American citizens. And you start to look at some of those statistics, and it changes your perception of who this is happening to. The average age is 12 years old. Middle schoolers, you have attendance being taken one time a day. You have a drive. I've seen it with my own children. When they become 13 and 14, they want money and they want to get those jobs. And it's very easy for parents to push them out into the workforce and have those funds be direct deposited into their accounts. So those are the big things that you want to really make yourself aware of, from how easy it is to go under the radar. It is everywhere. In the US, California is #1 for trafficking. Texas is #2. Florida is #3. Those are really terrifying statistics. The state course that came out here in Florida was around Super Bowl. So the same things that we as managers look at for revenue compression events, those are your hot opportunities for there to be a trafficking spike in your area.
Can I just ask, Justin, you're getting out there into lots of property management companies around North America and beyond. Is this a topic that's coming up with you as you're talking about safety? Obviously, I know your safety course, there's a lot of focus on the property itself, but I know you're getting more into the wider view of safety. Is this a conversation that's coming up, or is it something that you're just making people aware of?
It does come up, and it usually comes up as a surprise. Unfortunately, not everybody's gotten to hear what Catherine's sharing or hasn't been able to understand what this problem is, which is why it's so great that Catherine's really helping push this forward. But generally speaking, they're surprised. I was in Utah at a company recently where they hadn't taken a close look at it, and one of the identifying factors is you have a guest that's rented the property that lives nearby. So here you were in Park City, Salt Lake City is a half hour away. Someone's rented, and you may initially go, okay, staycation, whatever, but it should put a little bit of a red flag to make sure you're paying a little closer attention. And come to find out, they'd rented the property to use young girls in sexually explicit videos. And the only reason it was caught was because a neighbor noticed an issue with the property, and the rental agent went over to the property to investigate because they couldn't get the renter on the phone. And then come to find out they encountered this. I think that's probably the biggest message that I take away from what's being shared here. And that is, you got to wake up and pay attention to this, because it can happen anywhere. Here, a top ski resort destination, everyone's putting their ski boots on and thinking about hiking and mountain biking. And yet this is happening right in the middle of that. And it can happen anywhere.
I was going to say, one of the things too is the people that are surprised by it and the people that aren't. So that's one of the things that we're really focusing on with that Can Stays conference, because you've got areas where it's known. It's 100% known that it's happening. It's happening in vacation rentals. You think about the oil sands where it's areas that are being used for corporate housing or sections along 401. Here in Florida, we've got sections along the I-75 corridor. People know it's happening and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address it. And they know that from a legislative and a safety perspective. So the education is important for the property managers, the hosts, the guests. It's also important for the local police force to understand that, hey, we're going to talk about this and we're going to address this, because we've had situations where we've raised our hand and said, this is human trafficking. Here's the dollar price tag for these girls. And you get the local sheriff's office that comes in and says, oh, it's porn. I'm not worried about it.
I think that's one of the most important things is the conversation, is actually starting that conversation. And something we're talking about a lot during Stir Crazy Month is getting out into your communities and connecting with local businesses, your local regulators, your chamber of commerce, all that kind of stuff, and network. And these conversations need to be brought up in those networking events. It helps the cause as a whole. That's the important part. But it also allows you to stand up and present yourself as a property management company that, you know, you're taking these responsibilities seriously. And I think when you're renting, when you're providing accommodation, Heather's always said this for the longest time. As soon as you get into the travel and tourism industry, you have a responsibility to your guests, to your property owners, and to the community. And when it comes to all of those, I want to go to Humphrey now. And I know the tools that you have in the Arsenal Superhog in terms of the guests. How can property management companies improve their guest screening to help combat things like human trafficking?
Thanks, Mike. Can I answer a question with a question? Because I think it's something which we all like to hide behind, which is actually, whose responsibility is this? Because I think the easiest thing to say is, look, it's the OTA's responsibility. Or is it? Whose actual responsibility is it to make sure that they know who's staying in their properties? Is it the OTAs who the booking has come through, or is it the operator?
I think the way to look at it is everybody's moral responsibility to take. Everybody at every point in the guest journey, whether it be the initial, if you're just doing bookings through OTAs, you have a responsibility, from my perspective, sorry, I don't want to speak for everybody, to have those checks and balances, to have those systems in place. One of the things that we're going to be putting out a blog post later today or tomorrow, focusing on this topic. And it really does cover off the fact that everybody in the chain, everybody responsible for this at all levels, have a responsibility to look into it, from my perspective.
Okay, I think that's a really interesting answer, because actually, if you're saying that everyone has responsibility, and I agree to a point with that, I think it's quite helpful to break that responsibility down into pounds and pence or dollars and bucks. And actually, if the OTA is taking 15% of the booking income, that still leaves the operator with 85% of the responsibility. And I think that the operator's approach is actually go, do you know what? It's really like the OTA's responsibility to do these checks when they make the booking. I'm here to focus on the guest experience, to focus on making sure that guest has a great stay. When actually, I think the issue is not just around trafficking, although that clearly is a massive issue, but it's around the taking responsibility of operators knowing who is in their properties and what they're using those properties for, whether it is for drugs or trafficking or poor neighborhood behavior. And I think that message gets lost and it also gets diverted. And I think it's like the simple message that I'd like to put out there is that as an operator, it is your responsibility to know who is in your property or your owner's properties at any point, whether it is from a lead guest making the booking through to the lead guest allowing other people to come and use the property alongside them. And it's really difficult getting into that conversation, because what you're having to do is tell most guests who are not trafficking, we actually need to take some steps which then allow us to identify that really small but hugely important minority who are taking advantage of short-term rentals for vicarious means.
I want to come back to the Superhog tools in just 1 second. It reminds me of a story, a post actually from Chris Morgan from IPRAC. We've been working a lot with Chris, obviously, with this Crazy Month. I'm not sure if you guys saw that post that he made. It was an interaction he had in a restaurant where he witnessed what he wrestled with a personal responsibility of seeing something that didn't feel right. He saw a neighboring table, I think it was with a young girl, and just something didn't seem right. And he wrestled, and the way he describes it, I'm going to share the link in a second as soon as I can find it. He wrestled with should I get involved? should I do something? And thankfully he did. I think he said he went to the washroom and he called the police and said, look, this is really weird. I got this bad feeling about this table. This kid looks really uncomfortable, keeps dropping this napkin on the floor. It actually sends shivers up my spine because the police showed up and it turns out that the daughter was there with the wife, who was, sorry, the mum, who was the ex-wife of the person they were with, who had just been released from prison and basically had pulled them out and cornered them. And he made the right decision. But I think a lot of people wrestle with that. That ethical and moral responsibilities. Do I take action if it's just a feeling that something is wrong? So I want to come back to Humphrey because I think there's that feeling that something is wrong, but there's also systems we can have in place that will give us the signals that we can react to this kind of thing. Is there anything that you can recommend, the systems that people can put in place to begin to combat this and have those signals made presented to you when you're making those bookings?
Yeah, the simplest thing is you've got to do something. If you're not doing something, then not only are you opening yourself up to this abuse likely to happen in your properties, but you're also giving yourself absolutely no alibi if something does go wrong, and you're going to be held responsible for that. So the first thing that I would do is I would just make it really clear in your listings that you are aware of trafficking offence and that you do take steps in order to prevent it. And by doing that, you will have done something which such a tiny percentage of the short-term rental market does. So that will make a difference, because from an impact perspective, people who don't do that, the bad actors, will be looking for the low-hanging fruit. The second thing is that doing something rather than just speaking a good game is also important. Now, with Superhog, you're able to do screening based on guest interaction and based on no guest interaction. Clearly, having no guest interaction is a benefit, but it also doesn't work quite as well from getting the guest to buy into it as a part of the process. I think that the question I would pose is that we all, when we turn up to get on the plane, we all are okay with going through airport security. We don't like it. We don't love it. We don't think it's a particularly great process, but we're all happy to do it because we want to get on the plane. Now, going through a screening process is a bit like getting through security, airport security, before you get to check into the property. It is sensible. And we've got to the point in our industry where, because of the unique challenges our industry faces, that we're all agreeing that wearing a seatbelt in a car is a good thing to do. It helps you, it helps other people. So it's time to start wearing the seatbelt, and it's time to actually start asking your guests and not be ashamed about it, because you're able then to identify those bad actors. Superhog is able to do a whole different range of guest screening, or as we call it, know your guest checks. And we're able to automate and make the process super simple. Obviously, there are other people who do this as well as Superhog. The key is that you're doing something so that if someone questions you, you're able to demonstrate that you've actually tried to take steps to mitigate it.
Yeah,
I think that's a
yeah.
sorry. I was gonna say, I think that's a really important point, Humphrey, because under the TVPA regulations, if you should have known, you're liable. And so even taking that step to say, we did a background, we did a guest screening check, we did a banking verification, we did what we could, it does start to help, and it builds trust. And to your point, if you have more and more people going through the process, it stops being a minority that's asking for this information. If only one airport asked for identification to go through security, then you'd be looking to go through different airports. But the minute everybody steps in from a trust perspective and says, this is what we need to do, hotels do it. You need to show identification when you check into a hotel. I think we've got to lose the complex of, this might make the booking difficult. We might lose the booking, and I don't want to lose the booking, so I'm not going to ask them for this information. We need to elevate our standards beyond that, because it's so important.
So something I was going to say, another point that I saw this week was Conrad O'Connell did a post. It was about American Express. And when American Express first started, they actually put out a letter to say, we're not for everybody. And I think we need to be comfortable as property management companies to say that this is the way we operate. These are the standards we have in place. These are our core values. And if you don't want to book with us because we ask you to do certain things to meet those core values, then that's okay. There are other places you can go stay. And I think that's it's a hard stance to take. And I think it's going to make people feel a little uncomfortable, because you're basically cutting off people who are like, I don't have that attitude. You're not going to serve my needs. But I think if you believe in your values, if you believe in those enough, you'll make them a part of your systems. Sorry, Humphrey, I cut you off there.
No, I was just going to say that I think it's one of my kind of challenges for 2024 is that I want to make sure that within short-term rentals, there is a clearly defined category, which is called risk management. And everything that we're discussing here, it fits into that category of risk management. And for an operator, it's really important that you are proactively taking steps to deal with risk management because it helps you just run a better business. It will add more pound notes because that's been proven. It will help you deal with sensitive issues like trafficking. It will mean that you're less susceptible to be used for them in the first place as well, because you're taking control and trying to get stuff done up front. But it is also accepting that everyone's different and everyone's appetite for this is going to be different. Use the right tools for you and your business, get the balance right for you, and then you should start to see the dividends that come from it.
Preparing everything for the Stir Crazy Month and especially for Safety Week, it came to my realization that it is such a massive topic. There are so many different areas to focus on. It can seem overwhelming, especially our audience here today live, majority small business, and you have single properties. We don't want to scare anybody off from doing this business. I think you can still be a very responsible and ethical short-term rental business owner if you're not covering every single base. But I think, as you said, you need to be showing the due diligence that you're doing something. Certainly for the property management companies, Justin, I'll speak to you on this, is that are you seeing companies implementing like a position of designated safety officer? Is their responsibility in the company to not only look after the safety of the guests, the safety of the staff, and safety of the community too, and helping to shape policies, procedures, and implement those kind of within those companies you're working with?
You're seeing certainly some of the bigger vacation management companies, and this is something I've been talking about for years. Sue Jones with HR for VR. We did a program at the VRMA a few years ago just talking about OSHA safety and have your staff been certified to use an air compressor when they're blowing out and doing cleaning. Do you know this on the MS data sheet that you need to know on Dawn detergent? And do your cleaners, have they been educated on you can't mix chlorine and bleach together? We lost 2 cleaners in our industry last year because they did just that, because nobody did that basic training with them. And so across a wide swath, if you're managing your own home, you need to know this stuff. And if you're managing a rental agency and you've only got 3 employees, you may be in charge of reservations, you may be in charge of marketing, you may be the agency owner, but you also have got to take that role to understand that safety is critical, and you've got to put that hat on. It makes a difference when, unfortunately, a claim comes in. Yeah, we have someone who does a safety program. Yes, we check US consumer product safety, or in Canada too, we're checking the recalls. We know that Thompson's water seal that's in some of our properties and stored in the garages, we found out that was recalled because it could spontaneously catch on fire. So you've got to pay attention to all of these things, and you have to have someone designated to do it. I'd say maybe 5% of property management companies have that, but it should be 100. It's a no-brainer. And to Humphrey's word, with risk management, it might even be titled that because it's safety and risk management, and we've got to pay attention to that.
Most people don't actually know I'm a full-time firefighter, and Justin's a retired volunteer firefighter. And both of us, certainly in my organization, I'm in a major metropolitan city just outside Toronto, and we have an incredible team of people, and that's all they do is focus on the health and safety of the firefighters and our equipment and all that kind of stuff. And I do try and translate that to property management companies. There are requirements under OSHA to have, certainly as an employer, you have a duty to your employees to be providing yourself with training, but also training your employees on all aspects of health and safety. And I can't remember exactly what the number is. Based on a certain number of employees, you actually have to have health and safety representatives, both from management and from employees. So we mustn't lose sight of that, because I think a lot of times small companies, as you're a fledgling company and you're growing, you're taking on staff, you're taking on more properties, that is an area of the business we tend to forget, because the people who are making the decisions tend to sit in an office, answer phones, and do emails. They forget about sometimes the on the ground. One of the things I wanted to talk about in this session as well was staff safety. There's been some stories over the last few years, and especially with the fentanyl epidemic across North America, is people coming into properties and using recreational drugs and leaving them behind. And not just drugs, we have weapons, we have all kinds of things that get left. Loaded handguns, that's a big topic too. It's training your people. It's okay, what is the policy and procedure for that? Justin, are those some of the conversations that are happening as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always surprise people with the stats that I have. We estimate that about 38% of all guests bring, at least here in the US, bring a gun with them on vacation. And when I say that to property managers, they're like, only 38%? We find them in our rental properties all the time. And a lot of individual managers are like, oh my gosh, I would never allow a gun. I'm like, they're bringing them. Trust me. That's not necessarily the issue that they're bringing them. It's when they leave them behind and a kid finds them. And we've had cases of that, or a cleaner finds them. So there are a lot of different things that are going on in these properties: illegal activities, drug selling, alcohol is legal, and in most places now marijuana is legal. But now that marijuana is legal, people are using cocaine a lot more. You go into Colorado to the ski resort areas. I talked to managers there. They're like, a couple of years ago, they legalized pot and everyone was showing up. We wanted to get the properties ready early, get the guests in, because we didn't. They're going to the dispensaries and then showing up trying to figure out how to open the door locks while they're stoned. So it was like, well, we got to fix this. Now their new problem is shifted into, pot, that was easy. That's easy to get. Now they're going back to cocaine again. And we're seeing a lot more cocaine use, and that left behind in the property. So there's a lot more due diligence that needs to happen by management companies to go through these properties. And I get it. It's hard to find cleaners. It's hard to check these. But inspecting a property after a guest has departed has never been more important than it is now. Getting in and checking every little detail and making sure the drawers are empty, looking under the beds, looking in the cabinets, and making sure that there's nothing unsafe there.
Now, even between the cushions on the couch, things always get stuff down there. There was an article from 2021 of a 19-month-old dies fentanyl toxicity after staying at a Florida rental. The synopsis basically was the family got there late, put their kid to bed, and I guess the bed sheets hadn't been cleaned properly, and there was a small crystal of fentanyl in the bed, and it was a contact toxicity, which is, I see this all the time in my job responding to medical calls, and we have to be super careful of not touching surfaces, because just the tiniest little crystal of fentanyl can actually be extremely hazardous. So ensuring those checks and those procedures are consistent. And I think that that's the biggest part. Humphrey, what do you think are some of the best things that people can be doing in their properties to, as part of systems? I know this doesn't really fall into the guest screening per se, but I know that you're very much in connection with a lot of other technology that's out there. Are there systems that you can recommend that companies can be using?
I think we're talking about life and the fact that anything can happen in life, and it's very difficult to be in control of everything. And when we're talking about these types of instances, it all comes down to training. It all comes down to your team. It comes down to humans being able to take the right decision at the right times, and experience. So I think that the operator community being able to share wisdom and share stories and share approaches is going to be the most appropriate way of trying to get up to speed with it. Justin is going to be able to share some pretty illuminating aspects on that. Again, just do something, try and do something. You only can eat an elephant by a piece at a time, and it takes a whole community to want to eat the elephant for us to solve this. Do something, and then make sure you know who's staying in your properties, because then you're able to take those steps to tell others about who they were and what didn't go so.
And Justin, the systems that you're seeing being put into place, something that I created a few years ago for my property, it's essentially a tear-off checklist, and that was actually to help build guest trust. They would show up, there is a checklist that's been filled out, it's been signed, that all these safety considerations have been done. People have checked to make sure that the water safety kit for the paddle boat or the canoe is in place, the first aid kit's been checked. What are you seeing for people's policies and procedures they're putting in place?
Humphrey mentioned seatbelts earlier. In the US, about 82% of people wear a seatbelt. And they ask, well, why aren't the other 18% of people wearing seatbelts like they should? And generally speaking, those people will respond and say, there's an airbag, so I'm covered. Or I'm not having government tell me what to do. I correlate that a lot over to what we're working with short-term rentals. There are a lot of managers that are going, until I have to really get in there and do that, until something happens, we're not going to address that. And I think a key component of this is going to be on educating the guests. And I've transitioned a little bit recently of putting some energy into, whether it's social media or just direct content, working to have guests ask. It would be simple for Humphrey to say, hey, If you got a clean background before you want to rent a property, you want to make sure you do. And that's a good thing to have. You should be proud of that because now somebody wants to rent to you. But on the other hand, guests should be asking questions like, there's a hot tub over my shoulder here. Who put chemicals in it? When did they put chemicals in it? Are you asking those questions? And before I want to stay and rent this home from you, I want to know that a certified technician changed the chemicals in there, so I'm not going to get chemical burns. I want to know that it's been balanced. And when's the last time the water was changed? We know from a safety perspective that water in a hot tub in a vacation rental environment should be changed every 4 to 6 weeks. And most hosts and managers who are listening right now are going, holy smokes, I don't have time to change my hot tub water more than once a year. But you should be, and we've got to put all these type of things in place. And I think part of it's going to come, and we're seeing it even without my small little participation. People are starting to ask these questions. When was the property last cleaned and who cleaned it? Because I don't want fentanyl in there and I want to make sure it's clean for my kids.
To Humphrey's point about you can only eat an elephant one piece at a time, right? Because I own and manage my properties and I'm small and it can feel very overwhelming. And I think this is where finding the right partners is really important, because if you try to do everything yourself, you'll do nothing. And I think designating the strategic plan for your business, whether you have one property or you have 1,000 properties, is really important to say, this is what we're going to focus on for training and this is who we're going to partner with, because I don't have time to find all the training programs that I should be doing. And then also from a security and privacy perspective, going through those screenings, like it's great if I say I'm going to require everybody to give me a driver's license and I'm going to do these background checks. Now you fall into a realm of you have data privacy protection requirements if you're handling that yourself as a small property manager. Like, what are you doing with that data? If I'm requiring banking verifications from my team, am I handling it appropriately? Is there a privacy officer? Is there a security officer for that data too? So I think this is where, going back to the financials of this, you can get lost in the I need more bookings, and you start exposing yourself to massive risk because you're not partnering with the right people who are trained and certified to say, we're going to handle the screenings for you and we're compliant. And if there's a data breach or what have you, we've got this policy, because otherwise it ends up on somebody's desk and you've got all of this personal information for your guests, for your team members. And that is a much bigger problem than if you just take the time to go through the vendors that are available and find the one that is going to give you the most reassurance and protection for your business.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a great segue actually into the data protection side of safety, because that's a huge part is protecting the data of your guests, protecting the data of your employees, and who are you partnering with. And I know Heather and I have worked with companies in the past where we know that there are sticky notes with people's credit card numbers on, just on people's desks with a name and a booking number attached to it. What happens to that sticky note? Does it get shredded? Does it go in the recycling? It's these kinds of things that just don't occur to some people, and it is a huge risk.
And I think that the scary part is you assume, especially when you're smaller, you get a bigger company, they've done lots of marketing, they've got huge presence, they've got 3,500 employees and all this kind of stuff, and you assume they have it right. And so you don't ask the questions like, what are your data privacy practices? When was your last SOC audit? Do you do PIN testing? So choosing the right vendors it's really important in making sure that just because I'm small doesn't mean that I shouldn't be asking for those data security practices, because I'm still liable. And I think that's one of the interesting questions that Humphrey had brought up earlier, like who's responsible? Is it the OTAs? Is it the property manager? Because when you start going through all the different people that handle your guests' information, right down to that cleaner, there's a lot of people that if you're not familiar with the contract, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing back and forth about who is responsible for that credit card, for that identification or information. And there's a lot to keep in mind with that. Even things like pictures, posting pictures of guests and making sure that you got the proper photo releases.
That's a great opportunity for property management companies and individual owners to get their guests to share on social media. I think it's perfectly fine if they are sharing on their own accounts, but then if you're reposting that and you're using that as part of marketing, you definitely got to be careful that you have that permission to do that.
And both parents, that's one of the interesting things we've seen here when we start talking about this and going down into the weeds. I may give permission, but my child's parent, who maybe I'm going through a bitter custody battle with, didn't give. And so even though I signed it, that other parent is really upset. And especially if something, tying back to trafficking and looking at what's being shared about these children on social media, if they can be tracked and that sort of thing, making sure you've gone through and vetted all of your data privacy protections, you've gotten those photo releases from all applicable parties. I've had tons of my kids' friends that say, can you just sign for me? And it's, I'm not your legal guardian. I can't sign for you. Making sure you got the legal guardian to sign.
One topic that comes up quite often is nuisance complaints by neighbors about guests staying at properties. And then you also have the flip side of that too, where you have complaints from your guests about neighbors. Now, this could present an issue for safety. I know I've personally witnessed at my properties in the past where guests have got into it with neighbors, and unfortunately, I can speak to this from firsthand. If you don't embrace your neighbors as part of your business and let them know what you're doing and making that relationship and networking with them and saying, look, I am your first point of contact. You have any problems, you let me know and we'll deal with it. Your neighbors will advocate for themselves, and quite often they will do that in a very negative way. What do we feel is some of the best ways to handle this? Is not always the best approach to immediately call the police to help intervene. Justin, let's start with you on this. Do you find that there are some best practices out there that people are using to help deal with this from a policy and procedure standpoint?
Yeah, a lot of professional managers or hosts now are posting signs, and I refer to it as a safety board. I think the refrigerator is a good location, but you can also have a safety board in your main entry that has a lot of important information on it. Who to call if there's electrical issues, who to call if you're having trouble with plumbing, the management, the owner, and of course, the most important thing, posting the property address so people can report an issue. I think it touches on a really important factor, and that's alcohol. There was a study that was done recently that showed 78% of people who go on vacation drink. And not only do they drink, but at some point during their vacation, they're going to reach a level of intoxication. And so you're going to have somebody next to you. If you go on vacation, if you don't have somebody in a rental property, even if it was the most friendly couple in the world, but they're just having a glass of wine, and it does present a lot of different safety hazards. I know my friends at Proper Insurance talk a lot about off-premise liability and the type of protections that are involved with alcohol. So it's key to be able to report those issues. I think it's best to get the property manager or the host involved with it. They should be the ones calling the police. They may know the neighbor's house. Maybe it's not renters. And I think that's the first step. Obviously, if it's critical and people are getting shot or dying or something terrible, then 911 is the first way to go. But getting who owns that house involved is, I think, the key way to go.
Obviously, one of the easiest ways to limit interactions with bad guests and your neighbors, especially if you've built a good relationship with your neighbors, we're all going to have bad guests. That is, I think that's inevitable in anybody's business, but and how you combat that is a big part of your business in terms of the policies and procedures you have in place. Humphrey, from your perspective and the guest screening side of things, what is it about the guest screening that can help limit those problems? The systems that you work on, that you have in place, how do you find that they help to reduce those challenges with the guests who are renting your properties?
So I think accountability is a big one, and being able to identify who those people are. As Justin said, alcohol is a massive factor. The majority of times when we see complaints, bad behavior, alcohol is involved. The other thing to add is that the lead guest is not always the person who is staying at the property, and therefore you really need to know who all the adult guests are going into a property before booking. And then another thing to mention is the way that different people behave in different scenarios. We all might be on best behavior when we go to a conference, but when we're with a bunch of mates on a stag do, we're going to maybe behave in slightly different ways. So I think the only way of being able to understand what the likelihood of a booking is going to be is by going through a screening process of understanding who all the adult guests are, and then being able to see whether or not that is likely or not to cause bad behavior. And ultimately, a real benefit of screening the guests, as Heather and Leo will talk about later, is by being able to show neighbors, look, I know who all my guests are. If you have any issues, you must reach out and get in touch with me, because then I'm going to be able to act on it.
Mm-hmm. And Heather, I know from your many years of 20 years plus of running a medium to large size property management company, you got to have some great stories about this kind of issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention one, because this was one that happened where there was no resolution, and that was with a neighbor with dogs. The neighbor was very anti the short-term rental next door, and he just let his dogs roam free, and it became a municipal problem. It ended up with the owner having to stop doing rentals, and in fact had to, ultimately sold his property and bought something else. There's times when neighbor issues get to a point where they cannot be resolved without getting police involved and without getting local authorities involved. And at that point, it may be the time when you think, this is not the business to be in this particular location, because my guests are at risk and there's no way I will be able to manage that risk when I'm not there. So that was a difficult situation. We actually had that on a couple of occasions where owners ultimately sold their properties and moved on because it was just not safe for their guests to be in there at any time. So I just wanted to throw that one in. You can't resolve everything.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes if you can step back and look at the big picture and go, is this resolvable? And is this going to continue to be a matter of a safety issue for the guests? And if the police are always getting involved, maybe it is a time to call it a day and move on. And it is not a sign that you've lost. You have a business that is portable. You can move that business elsewhere and hopefully build it on a foundation of trust, respect with your neighbors and your community right from the get-go, which can help resolve some of those issues. Okay, so that's the top of the hour. I think we've had a great discussion. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give another big thank you to Proper Insurance for taking care of Stir Crazy Month. Again, we could not do this without them. So thanks so much to Proper. I know Nick was here on the call today, so I'm sure he's got some good stuff he's going to be sharing over the next few weeks in regards to safety and its effects on insurance. I also want to thank Justin Ford from Breezeway. I'm going to put a link here. Justin put together an incredible safety program, which is easily accessible, and you can go onto the Breezeway safety program page there, and you can look through the course that's available and get yourself safety certified. Especially if you have a property management company, this is essential to have somebody in your company who can actually go into each and every property that you have and give it a thorough safety inspection. And his training will provide the education to do that. Humphrey, thank you so much. From Superhog have some phenomenal tools that you can use as part of your guest screening. They don't do insurance, just so you know. But yes, Superhog's guest screening tools, and actually you actually have a pretty good collection of tools there. It's not just for guest screening. Can you just cover off a few of those real quick, Humphrey?
Yeah, so look, I think as part of your risk management toolkit, you need to be taking into account guest screening, or know your guest, as we call it, deposit management, making sure that you've got some low levels of protection for the little bits and pieces that go wrong. You need to be clearly thinking about insurance, which is proper. So please go and speak to them. And then if you need some other protection, we can help as well. And then you also need to be thinking about your mediation and resolution program. So what happens when something goes wrong? Are you the right people to be speaking to the guest, or do you want to pass that on to someone else like Superhog to help you out?
That's great. Thank you. And then lastly, thanks to Catherine. We are big supporters of her conference that's coming up in April, the CanStays Rental Alliance Conference. It is a conference focused mostly on Canadian properties and the impacts that regulatory bodies are having here in Canada. And Catherine, please share with us some things that the audience needs to know about the CanStays event.
Yeah, it's going to be in Banff. It's April 20th to the 22nd. It's going to be a phenomenal event. We're going to cover exclusively Canadian content, which I think is a big differentiator, because it's something that you don't always get. And the issues that come up province to province in terms of what Ontario is doing with garbage and recycling versus what Alberta is requiring, they're so vastly different in terms of taxation, employment, banking regulations, and how you can qualify for grants that are available under the federal government as well as provincial, and looking at some of those revenue and direct management strategies. So it is exclusively Canadian content. We have a lot of great speakers. Justin, of course, will be there speaking on safety matters as well, and a number of others, but there's going to be a lot of Canadian speakers too, which is great to give some new voices that perhaps don't get a chance to talk about some of that. One of the things I'm so excited about is the management practices we're looking to bring in for an emergency situation like wildfires and other natural disasters that can take place, where we want to partner with the governmental entities to be a part of the solution for those types of situations. It's going to be a really great conference to open up doors for Canadians that haven't been opened before.
And one of the things that I'm finding in the preparation for this event is the most powerful thing that you can do as a short-term rental property management company or as an individual property is to get involved with your local alliance. And if you don't have one, form one. The networking that happens with neighboring companies in your tourist destination, the power that you have not only to improve your businesses by sharing knowledge, comes really to a point when you can go as an organization, as a group, a collective, and go to your local municipality or your local city and basically present your case to not only fight against things that are happening, but it's be a part of the solution. Don't just present the problem.
Yeah.
Be a part of the solution. And I think that's where CanStates is really going to come into its own, is to help really form a lot more solid alliances. There was some great responses from the poll there. We had some very good positive feedback. The human trafficking was a new thought to make sure we share education in our alliance. Michigan is actually in the top 10 places for that to happen. Thank you for the great webinar. And the safety issues from chemicals and weapons found left behind in properties was a big eye-opener. So thank you, everybody, for giving up an hour with us today. These recordings will be available. We'll be sharing lots of little nuggets over the next week or two. And we really hope that you will take these messages that we've talked about today. And as I think I want to take away from what Humphrey said, is this is a big elephant and you can just do something. Maybe every month, I'm going to focus on this part. And for the next 12 months before we come back to Stir Crazy month next year, come back to us and say, this is what I implemented. This is the changes I've made. And these are the things I've managed to accomplish to make my business that much better and that much more ethical and that much more responsible.
If I can just jump in and say that is my biggest takeaway. Just do something. Thanks, Humphrey, for that. Just do something.
Amazing, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Enjoy the rest of the content we have available on safety. Next week, we'll be talking about trust as part of covering off Book Direct Day, which is next Wednesday. So hopefully we'll see some more interaction on social media, and we look forward to seeing you on our next live panel session, which is next week on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern, where we'll be talking about trust in your short-term rental business. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.